What's up everybody, this is Mattia and today we're going to review the KZ EDX Pro. These are the bigger brother and the successor to the original KZ EDX, which was a set that for under $10 I really liked. And these are an upgrade, but not a massive one as some people made them to be. So why do not I actually have them in hand? Well, they're my brother's, so he's actually using them. My own pair is going to get here by the end of March, I think. And yeah, so I'm sorry I don't edit videos, so you're actually going to just go with this for today. Sorry about that. I have the EDX, or the original EDX, with definitely not the stock cable. And I have okay, I grabbed them in the wrongest way possible. Oh my god. Okay, I have the EDX right here, and I have the Moondrop Quarks, my babies, just for comparison's sake. So before getting into the EDX Pro, I wanted to do a bit of insight in the whole KZ issue that's been going on lately. What is the problem essentially? Well, they're hybrid IAMs, and especially the last ones, the collaboration that were basically the CRN, and it was between KZ and Chronicle, and then the DQ6S, which was a collaboration between KZ and Bad Guy Good Auto Reviews, or Chris. Those had actually functioning drivers, but they were, in terms of volume, so low in comparison to the dynamic driver that they basically didn't make any difference in sound, in terms of sound, when they were literally stripped off from the IAM, from the shell. And that was exposed, KZ was exposed by Delta Fire and some other guy, I can't really remember the name right now, and Acros or Tony Tex. So those three people decided to just open up a pair of, I think a pair was the DQ6S, and the other one was the CRN, but they all got opened and they discovered that the balance armatures, the magnetostatic in the CRN, where it basically had an impedance that the dynamic driver did not have. I'm going to post the links in the description if you want to read the article. And the KZ finally, I think it was today, they finally had a good response to all of what was going on. Not in terms of why they've done this. The reason is clear. They wanted to scam people into getting into the AMs. Despite not having the drivers, they were promising that they actually worked, that they were actually working. So they basically put out more than a couple of IMs, and people, especially new buys that came into the hobby and saw these, and they have, the tribrid, the CRN is a tribrid, it has a balance armature, the dynamic, and then the magnetostatic, and the DQ success, which basically its whole success not only relied upon tuning, but also in terms of the unique driver configuration, which was a triple dynamic driver. Turns out the smaller dynamic drivers, those that are back in the shell, the 6mm ones that are supposed to work in a couple to produce mids and treble, they don't work. All the stuff is being done by the dynamic driver. By all means, those are actually connected to the dynamic driver, but unfortunately, they do not really produce any listenable volumes. Like, they are so below the volume of the dynamic that basically KZ made the excuse that despite the drivers that were not basically even measurable in terms of volume, they were making something psychoacoustically. It means that basically, despite the fact that they're 40 fucking dBs lower than the driver that's actually producing something, they somehow affect the sound. Now, those people that ripped the IMs off and opened them and extracted the drivers and listened to them without the drivers inside, without the extra BAs, magnetostatic, or DDs, they confirmed the fact that the difference was so small or inexistent that the fact that the drivers were inside, the extra ones, was absolutely neglectable, which means KZ could have simply just removed them, released the CRN and the DQ6S as single dynamic drivers, and they could have made them definitely cheaper. As for an example, the CRN that sells for now for about $32 could have maybe sold for about $20. The EDX Pro is one of their more expensive single dynamic driver models. Now, considering that both Clinical and Chris will have to get money for these collaborations, I will stipulate the price to be at around $24-$25, which is still cheaper than both the CRN and the DQ Success, with the DQ Success being a tad cheaper than the CRN. Just keep that in mind. Just because the CRN has, a magnetostatic, KZ might have been able to push the price a bit more, and to no avail, because, well, the actual avail was the fact that people got into the CRN and DQ Success because they were fancy. They had fancy driver configurations, and they got scanned for that. Not every person that purchased the CRN and the DQ Success was going in for just the tuning, which was the main purpose of their existence, but they were more attracted to the configuration in the drivers themselves and the actual how they sounded. And that's unfortunately a common trend that's going on for years. KZ started out back in 2017, if I'm not wrong. My first IM was the KZ ZSN, and that also, I think, was only a single dynamic driver working because the BA was literally doing nothing. When I stripped off the BAs due to an accident that had both nozzles removed, they actually fell off, and the drivers got basically detached. I put them back in. I put some glue around the base of the nozzle. That basically they were two separate parts. Was the metal nozzle and then the shell itself, which was plastic, regular plastic. I put them back in and noticed no sound difference. And I thought to myself, are BAs really making such a difference? So this thing might have been going on from at the absolute first entries from KZ. That's how long they've been kept scamming people. That's wrong, really wrong on a whole another level if you put it into that perspective. If you think about just the collaborations, then maybe it's not a massive issue. KZ has actually promised a refund for all of the DQ Success owners that wanted to get their money back because they basically got scammed. They promised it today after 4 fucking weeks of that information being leaked out that the drivers weren't really working. And they made so many excuses until this point where they finally got around the issue, finally got what they were gonna say, the right things to say, and not just hire bots to comment down the Twitter post that the issue, where the issue was being pushed into the public. That was ridiculous. I'm going to post that too because you need to know what they've done before saying finally what they had to say for all this time, for basically almost a month. I think we're almost a month in, and yeah, that's kind of sad. So KZ finally got their things straight, or supposedly they got their things straight, because I still haven't seen anyone being refunded. Clearly, this thing has been said by KZ today. So in the next days, we're gonna see if we're still able to trust such a company that has scammed so many people. Yeah, the products did indeed produce sound. They weren't completely broken. The problem is, if that you're promising a driver account, you're supposed to integrate those drivers in the tuning and not just let the dynamic driver alone produce sound. If you're making a hybrid, make a hybrid. Otherwise, just chop off the BAs, lower the price, and fuck you, sell it as a single dynamic model. That's what they should have done. And for that sake, I'm just going to review single dynamic driver IMs from them from now on, until people really know that the issue has been fixed. The guys that actually managed to open the CRN and the DQ success and confirm that the drivers weren't working actually get the new entries from KZ, not from KZ themselves, but from third-party sites, so that KZ doesn't know what people are they sending their review units to, because that can happen too. They might fix a a single item to have it reviewed by by a reviewer, have it measured, and etc etc etc. KZ knows this. They know this, and because they've been talking about measurements and all this stuff and say that basically they don't matter. That's bullshit. I'm going to post a link, of course, as I've already said before. Just I want you um, to understand that single dynamic models are the only thing you can trust coming from them right now. So I'm just going to review these, and let's just hop into it. Sorry for the whole giant fucking disclaimer. So the EDX Pro. The EDX Pro is indeed a single dynamic driver model coming in at like $13 to $14, depending if you get it with the mic or not. This is the mic version, and by far this is the best cable I've seen from KZ. I know there's a better cable that came with the last ones. They were metal, and the cable was actually pretty good on those. I don't remember the model, but I think Delta Fire reviewed them, if I actually recall correctly. You know, and those actually got a better cable than this, but this is surely better than the shitty black cable that came with the other KZs. The problem with this one is the over ear, the memory wire part is a bit too tight, and I had to straighten it out with a hair dryer, because otherwise it will actually pull the IMs themselves out of my ears. And it was kind of painful at first, but when I let them loosen up a bit by heating them, the comfort was actually pretty fine. The body is actually thicker than the regular EDX. So you see the EDX is like this, and again, I'm extremely sorry for not being able to show you the product itself, but just take these as a reference. These are entirely an acrylic shell. They're extremely light. They're lighter than the EDX Pro, and these actually are basically half the thickness of the EDX Pro. The original EDX is more comfortable, weighs a bit less, and in terms of just general design shape, they're pretty damn similar, if not identical. But it's just the thickness of the actual shell that's making the original EDX fit my ears a bit better. So overall comfort, definitely the EDX stands out for me. I've not tried the foam tips with the Pro version, although I think they will not have the same benefit that the original EDX that they have on the original EDX, because the Pro are so thick that if I try to bottom them out, they protrude a bit too much and they start hurting on this side of my ear. So not so much into the inside, because if you look at them and you compare them to the EDX, in terms of the front part, they're pretty damn identical. It's just they vary in terms of thickness, and that does indeed affect the comfort. I think also that the Q2C connector on the Pro, which is I think a better design than these, because despite these having like almost a USB-A kind of fit right here. It's only proprietary for their stock cable, which sucks. So if you go and buy a QDC cable for these, it's not gonna work because they don't have the extrusion. They have they're actually cut inside. They are lined inside. I don't know if I can actually make you see. Yeah, you can kind of see it's not really protruded. The two pin mount is actually flush, and it's kind of prone to breaking. So I prefer the QDC one on these, although this means you're gonna have those plastic flaps on your ears. I hate them, and if my ears were fine with QDC comfort and QDC connectors, that will have been no issue. But unfortunately, it's kind of meh for me. You of course can put standard two-pin cables, the flush-mounted ones, and they're gonna work, but you're gonna have a bit too much of a protrusion because you're already having the protrusion of the QDC connectors. So comfort on these is okay. Isolation is bad, legitimately bad, even with the big silicones. And I found just the EDX being just a bit better. I don't think any KZ is good for isolation. The Moondrop quirks beat them out by a long, long, long shot. It's not even close for public transportation and just general use, and also for the fact that the quirks are way smaller. I'm gonna actually make a comparison. You can actually see how different they are. Basically, the EDX and the EDX Pro have a shell, and these do not have a body almost. They're just a barrel that contains a driver inside. So the comfort goes to the quirks, and you can actually deep fit the quirks, and not as well as an edemotic because the body is actually a bit thicker than the edemotics. Surprisingly, the edemotics are even smaller than these, but you can deep fit these with some foam tips, and the isolate a ton, really like 20 decibels of isolation guaranteed, I think. But they don't really get too close to the edemotics, but surely way better than these. And the, of course, I'm taking these as a point of reference, just in comparison to the EDX Pro, because in terms of build, they're almost identical. So yeah, isolation, EDX, EDX Pro, not really that good. So if you're searching for a lot of isolation from the world, maybe not your greatest choice. You're better off with the quirks, like even not considering the sound. And about the sound, let's just hop right into it. So these have a very, 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 very V-shaped response. They're not incredibly V-shaped, but it's clear that the amount of bass and treble and also upper mid-range is a bit too contrasty for my taste. Such was the frequency response on the original EDX. The EDX Pro takes a bit more of a refinement in the mid-range and in the bass region. The bass region is a bit tighter and has a touch less bluntedliness going on, while the EDX still has the extremely slow, sloppy kind of bass. Really fun, really entertaining, but just on the right songs. If you put classical music on the EDX, It's kind of meh because the decay is very slow in the EDX. The EDX Pro gets better at that, but it's still not as good as the Quarks. Just saying. And in terms of the mid range, you have a bit more mid range presence in the EDX Pro. The graph for the EDX and the EDX Pro is actually very similar. They sound very similar. It's just that the EDX Pro has some refinements here and there, in not only in the frequency response, but in technicalities. I think they're also a bit better, and the difference in technicalities is more noticeable than the tuning difference because as somebody already said, if you listen to a single KZIM that's not the CRN or the DQ6 or the DQ6S, you already listen to them all. They are very similar sounding and they're like divided in groups. And that kind of strengthens the point of, well, they all have the same dynamic drivers and the BAs are actually not working in the hybrid models, of course. So the EDX Pro and the EDX have this kind of almost 3D but blobby kind of imaging. They do not really have a lot of definement. Not even the Quarks have a lot of definement. Something like the Edemotics will absolutely shit on these all day, and even the Blom Yellow One, and surely the Moondrop Starfield. And the Moondrop Starfield is already getting behind among the new competition. So yeah, they already. It's look, of course. We're talking about like $20 IMs, but I have to give you at least some kind of reference. Imaging on all of these, it kind of sucks. Soundstage is definitely better on the EDX Pro than the Quarks, but I found the EDX, the original EDX, being a bit more expansive. Also, in terms of harshness, brightness, and what you're gonna find in terms of the sibilance region, they're both kind of harsh, honestly. And no matter how many hours I gave the EDX sounded a bit more natural, especially if you don't remove the metal filters. I do not recommend that since the treble gets so sharp, and the EDX Pro is sharper by default. It has several peaks in the upper mid and treble, more in the upper mids, sorry, and it's very noticeable in comparison with the EDX the stock EDX. If you remove the filters of the EDX, yeah, they get a bit more clear, but they lose definitely that control over the eyes that they have in the stock form. So by stock, the EDX is warmer, sloppier, less defined, less detailed, and less sharp, definitely, less sibilant. And the EDX Pro just doesn't give a fuck. Every time there is a cymbal hit or a very high pitched female singer or you know a high pitched piano key, you can really hear it and kind of hurts you. And the EDX Pro really gets annoying after a while, especially at high volumes. And the Pro is also tendentially a bit louder in comparison. It's a bit more sensitive in comparison to the EDX. So no problem with my phone. I just kept using all of these three with my phone, and the one that's less sensitive of them all is the Quarks. Unsurprisingly, since they have such a small dynamic driver, usually smaller drivers mean you need to have a bit more power to get that excursion and the same actual volume to a bigger volume of the driver. Doesn't matter whether it is a dynamic, a planar. Thing is actually changeable electrostatic, but in terms of this realm, yeah, bigger driver usually take less power to produce the same amount of volume. The EDX Pro presents a relatively spacious image, but it's very diffuse. And as I've said before, it's very left and right and center. Very, very not center and more right and left. Left and right. That sounds better. And really no imaging to speak of. Sorry, but I have to point that out. And it's very entertaining if you get those songs, the EDM and pop, rock, kinda. Rock gets really sharp. Metal, no, not recommended with these. You're gonna die. Um, Maybe some Japanese OSCs, but only the really well mastered ones, because they tend to have a bit more of a high pitched tone. The OSTs and the EDX Pro, if it basically has a grain of it's just a tad bit too sharp, they're gonna slap you in the face and let you know it and let you know about it. So in that regard, I found the original EDX to be actually better. But what does the EDX Pro gain in terms of the EDX is apparent detail. I listened to Walt from the OST of Zankyu no Terror, and the release from the piano was much more evident on the EDX Pro. And on several tracks of the Cowboy Bebop OSTs, when there were trumpets, and I actually had to lower the volume because sometimes they were unlistenable. But let's just skip on that. They were definitely a bit more defined, a bit clearer, and the thing that stood out most was the clarity of the Pro is definitely a step ahead than the EDX. The other thing I've noticed was that the bass was overall more concentrated on the sub bass in the original EDX, and it was a bit more spread out in the Pro version. That means that they have more of a linear bass shelf rather than just slope from the sub bass, like from 20 to 150 hertz, taking it as an example. um, Both of these are very bassy. Don't get me wrong; they're bassy among like as an objective perspective, they are bassy. But the EDX Pro is more bass, more bass. It's just more concentrated in the sub bass. EDX Pro has less bass. It's more controlled. It's thumpier, more defined. Definitely a better bass and definitely an improvement in comparison to the Quarks. They are actually way thumpier. They have way more bass, and the Quarks do have more bass, but rather than it coming off as thumpy and punchy, it comes off as basically mudding up the mid range a bit. The Quarks have the most potential when EQ'd, but in stock form, if you listen to them and at normal volume, they're kind of boring. They're kind of meh. Not the greatest entertainment levels. On the EDX Pro, you have a total opposite thing. You have all the fun, basically none of the refinement of the Quarks, and the original EDX is even more on the fun side. Zero refinement, zero fidelity. If that's what you're looking for, I will not even go with the Quarks because they are not even neutral. They're somewhat balanced in comparison to the EDX and the EDX Pro. Definitely. These are straight up V shaped, but the Quarks have their own thing going on. They're more detailed, they're less bombastic, and they're a bit more refined, if you could call them like that. But if you want a neutral sound, Edemotics. That's not even a question. Edemotics. Or if you can stand the deep fit, go with the Kados. Go with the Moondrop Kados. No, they're perhaps not in a graph as a graph standpoint to the level of the Edemotic ER2SC and XR. Well, the ER2SC is supposedly a bit better because people have been telling me it has a bit more of a wetter soundstage. It's definitely a bit clearer, and the lack of bass doesn't let the mid range muddle doesn't let the bass muddle the mid range up, which in the normal XR model I didn't hear at all. So imagine how clear the SE is going to get, and it's actually the next I'm willing to purchase. The EDX Pro is fun. It's like entering a disco and getting drunk, going to the beach afterwards, smoking a cigarette, lying there, waking up, and next morning you're feeling like shit because there is too much treble, too much mid range. At first, it's fine, it's alright, it's fun, but after a while, you got to get away from that shit because it's too much. It's too fucking much. The EDX is more relaxed, and I could actually recommend getting both the EDX and EDX Pro, the stock EDX, of course. Do not remove the metal filters. Do not do it. Will cause severe migraines and tinnitus. And EDX Pro does that even without modifying them. But yeah, they are refinement. They're just a bit too much for my tastes. I will still rather have the quirks for a longer listening session. However, if you want to have rapid bursts of energy and really have a very contrasty sound from bass to in the upper mid range, we have a lot of contrast, seeing how they are elevated in comparison to the mid range itself. Yeah, go for the EDX Pro, definitely. I recommend them over the EDX. They are indeed a jump up in price, but for $7, you can really $7 more. You can really ask for anything else. Perhaps a better IM from what I've heard will be the CCA CRA, and that has also been talked about really well by the community, but there are some people that hate it, just fucking straight up bleh. um, and I can imagine why. I definitely can imagine why. These are sharp, kinda. They are kinda harsh in terms of realism and overall, timbre. Let's not even go into that. The quirks are way closer to a natural, somewhat natural timbre, and in comparison, actually the EX has the less metallic, exaggerated timbre um, of the two. And volume scaling, they suck. They both suck. You get them on high volumes, fucking, they want to kill you. And yeah, another thing, dynamic range is better on the EDX Pro. The EDX does not have a lot of dynamic range, and I will say that depth is kind of meh on both, but the EDX has a bit of a bigger soundstage actually. So soundstage goes to the EDX, and depth is kind of identical. The EDX has a bit more of a massive image separation, but the EDX Pro has more refinement, more refinement in the notes. So if I will pick one of the two, it will definitely be the EDX Pro because it's kind of it's evident. You can hear the step up from the EDX. Things sound a bit more real and a bit more unnatural at the same time because the timbre goes to the EDX. Uh, will I pick up these instead of the quirks overall? Not just for longer or shorter listening sessions? No, because the quirks do have the massive fit advantage and the massive isolation advantage. Yeah, they have an attached cable, but they cost about $2 less than the EDX Pro. And there's actually a mic version with the quirks, so you can get that too. And they're even more pocketable, and I prefer the wire on the quirks than the stock wire on the EDX Pro, even though it is an improvement over the older KZ models. So yeah, that about wraps it up. Again, sorry for not having the item to show to you in my hands, but I'm guessing that this is not the only video you're going to watch to get an idea on the EDX Pro. A good IM, somewhat definitely not my taste. I definitely prefer neutral sound, but if you're just getting into the hobby and want something very fun, very entertaining, these are gonna impress you at first listen. They're that kind of IM that in the long, unfortunately, in the long way, in the long, you listen to them more and more and more, you actually do find more flaws in them when when you actually spend days and days and days and days listening. So yeah, if you're a neutral head, these things I'm saying will be apparent on first listen. You're just gonna go, "Ugh, what the fuck is going on?" That was kind of my first reaction, but I kind of adjusted to it and got to the point where I enjoyed those like 30 minutes of fucking dancing here, and returning to the quirks was like going from a party to a funeral. But the funeral in the end, despite being what a fucking bad comparison. The funeral was actually a bit better because the party hurt you and you got drunk. And the next morning you felt so ill and your ears hurt and you're dying. So yeah, not the most positive opinion on these. I'm getting a bit more critical in this review. 36 and fuck! Holy shit! I have to get this done. Okay, that's about it. Yeah, recommended. Not my first choice. Go with the quirks. See you in the next time.